Welcome back to Naval News. Today we have a great story coming from the WarZone, part of the drive.com, written by Mr. Thomas Nudik. Headline, Russia landing ships leaving the Baltic Sea, raising concerns that Ukraine may be their final destination. And why do we think that? We'll get into that in just a minute. But first, let's read from this piece, talking about 3 of these very capable amphibious ships that can hold, up to 10 tanks, hundreds of troops and supplies to keep them going for days on a beachhead if necessary, and can support them with direct fire. These are incredibly great ships, well-designed, purpose-built for invasion. There are already some in Crimea. 3 more are leaving the Baltic with 3 possible destinations. I won't steal Thomas's thunder. Let's let him from his piece. 3 Russian Navy amphibious warships are departing the Baltic Sea, heading towards the Atlantic Ocean as tensions continue to surround Moscow's buildup of troops and equipment on its border with Ukraine. A separate flotilla of 3 Russian landing ships had previously been the cause of recent alarm in Sweden, which had sent additional forces to the island of Gotland in the Baltic in response to the increased maritime activity in the region. So 3 amphibious support vessels like these went from the Kola Peninsula around Norway into the Baltic and joined the fleet there. 3 that were in the Baltic are now moving out into the Atlantic Ocean. That's what's going on in terms of ship movements. And we have pictures of them doing this from multiple sources. There's no doubt that these troop movements are happening, or at least these ship movements are happening. Back to the piece. A trio of vessels that left the Baltic today are headed for an unknown destination. They're comprised of Project 775 Rapucha class amphibious warships. All 3 are the Korolev, the Minsk, and the Kaliningrad are seen in the tweets embedded above. I encourage everyone to go to the WarZone and look at this article, click those tweets, and take a look at the video they have of them crossing under the bridge. They departed the port that was in Kaliningrad, that's a Russian enclave, on January 15th and passed through the Great Belt into the Atlantic Ocean. While naval transits, including those involving landing ships to and from Kaliningrad, are by no means uncommon, Swedish officials have made it clear that the current level of activity is unusually high. Yeah, 3 coming and then 3 that were there going again to destinations unknown, perhaps the Crimea, perhaps Ukraine. Is a concern. It appears that Western maritime patrol surveillance aircraft are keeping an eye on the Russian naval presence in the Baltic. U.S. Navy's P-8A maritime patrol aircraft was noticed operating off the Danish coast over the Baltic today, and the Swedish Air Force's S-100D Argus airborne early warning and control aircraft have also been active in the region. And we have some pictures here for you. Here's the new American P-8A Poseidon. Is a very capable maritime patrol aircraft, has high endurance, can carry a ton of different anti-submarine and anti-ship weapons. It's an awesome platform. It's based, I believe, on the 737 design, so it may look like a commercial liner on the outside, but believe me, on the inside, it is much different. It is very much a submarine hunter, among other things, including maritime patrol assets. This is the Swedish aircraft there that they were talking about. This is the S-100D. This is like an AWACS. It's a radar control and coordination aircraft. Propeller driven, you can see there. So these are the aircraft that are operating. Keep an eye on these Russian naval movements as they move out of the Baltic. And there's 3 destinations that are reasonable. 1, the 3 ships that just arrived came from the Kola Peninsula up north. So they may be heading north up there. That is a very real possibility, as I'm sure Mr. Thomas here is going to point out. Let's get down to where he speculates where they may go. Thomas continues in the piece. There has been speculation that the 3 Baltic Fleet landing ships could be headed for the Black Sea. Last year, the waters around the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula were subject to some tense standoffs between Russia, Navy, and NATO warships. Since then, the overall security situation has become much more uneasy, uneasy. With the steady influx of Russian troops and material to the border areas adjacent to Ukraine, including Crimea, the result has been fears of a potential invasion of Ukraine, an issue that is the top agenda during the talks between Russia and Western officials that ended in a stalemate this week. And should an invasion of Ukraine via the southern route manifest itself, the Black Sea Fleet would almost certainly carry out an amphibious landing in the Sea of Azov. The arrival of 2 large landing ships would provide a significant addition to the Black Sea's existing resources. Added to the factor that the upcoming exercise involving Russia and its close ally Belarus, which also borders Ukraine, but it's to the north, and I'll show you a map in a second. Russia forces have begun to arrive in Belarus for maneuvers, which have little to do to address the soaring concerns between Moscow and the West over Ukraine. In the past, there have been predictions that a new Russian invasion of Ukraine could well involve troops crossing the Belarusian border. The latest series of Russian-Belarusian drills significantly takes place along the latter country's southern and western borders, adjacent to both Ukraine and NATO member Poland. Movement of the Baltic Fleet ships could also be a straightforward transfer of assets, with the 3 Rapuchkas now sailing to the Kola Peninsula to take place of the 3 Northern Fleet landing ships now in the Baltic. So the destination of these amphibious ships is not clear yet. We do have some updates as of 6 o'clock this morning. We'll go ahead and read the most recent one. The 3 Russian Navy landing ships that had remained in the Baltic Sea Fleet have now left those waters. They did not stay in the Baltic. So there are a lot of ships at sea, a lot of these amphibious ships at sea right now, following the same route as the previous 3 vessels. As evidenced by the following photographs taken, they have passed through the Great Belt. These vessels involved in the latest movement of the Northern Fleet's Rapuchka class and other classes of landing ship. We will continue to track all 6 of these vessels. Wow. So that is unprecedented, as far as I know, to have 6 amphibious transport ships all at sea at the same time, with no clear military maneuver on their part. All the military exercises are happening over on the border with Ukraine and Russia and Belarus right now. This is some military, naval activity happening in and around the Atlantic Ocean and the Baltic there. So we'll continue to see where they end up. It is likely that they're going to end up at either Tartus, which is in Syria. Russia is very active in Syria right now. It's not unreasonable for them to end up there, or they could also end up in Crimea, considering that there's continued escalation happening in that region. Pardon me. So here's a quick map of Ukraine and Russia here on the right-hand side and Belarus to the north. They are adding a lot of Russian troops into Belarus right now for a military exercise. So Ukraine finds itself in this position where it is surrounded really on 3 sides, from Sevastopols and Crimea down here, this peninsula, with a lot of Russian military there. There's a Russian military buildup all along the border, just east and north of Kiev here. There's Kiev right here. And then to the north of Kiev, we have Belarus, where we have Russian troops there now as well. And Russian troops are also off the coast or the border rather, of Poland. And what has Ukraine done? Ukraine, hasn't really done anything to provoke any of this. And here in the Donbas region, which is this eastern region of Ukraine, that is held by Russian-supported rebels right now that, as long as they're being supported by Russia, they're doing what Russia, wants them to do. And so this is a contested region of Ukraine, has been since 2014, since they annexed Sevastopol. And all this is done from Putin's actions. Putin is urging West to act quickly to offer security guarantees that we won't bring Ukraine into NATO, which is laughable to me, but he's the one acting belligerently and, supporting rebels in Ukraine and annexing Crimea and all this stuff, all the while saying that we had better not bring somebody into a defensive alliance that has been around for decades, right? Now, I'm going to read a little bit from NPR, and what you'll see I'm doing here is I'm sourcing all sorts of different journalistic sites to show you that this isn't just one, site saying this. The entire world knows what's going on. And so we're going to read from a lot of the journalistic world right now. where it says here from NPR, dateline December 23rd, so just before Christmas, Moscow, Associated Press. All right, that's pretty unbiased. Associated Press. Russian President Vladimir Putin urged the West on Thursday to move quickly to meet Russia's demand for security guarantees, precluding NATO's expansion to Ukraine and the deployment of military alliance weapons there. Speaking during a marathon annual news conference, the Russian leader welcomed talks with the U.S. that are set to start in Geneva next month. We've already had those talks this week. They ended in a stalemate. So we know how that played out. But let's quote Putin, quote, "We want to ensure our security. We put it straight. There must be no further expansion of NATO eastward." So let's talk about NATO. Deputy Secretary, what is NATO?
NATO is a defensive alliance.
Why does NATO exist?
NATO exists to protect its member states.
What has NATO never done?
NATO has never expanded through force or coercion or subversion.
Since 2013, what is the status of the Monroe Doctrine?
The era of the Monroe Doctrine is over.
Oh, but what about the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999?
We're not focusing on the population of the Serb civilian population. We're focusing on the military, and that's Milosevic's military. Any of those things that help him sustain his capability to engage in repressive acts against the Kosovo Albanians that has to do with military targeting is fair game. We've gone through those before, and it's regrettable if it's affecting their civilian population.
NATO is a defensive alliance. People can apply to join NATO if they meet certain requirements. We've gone over this before, but let's talk about Ukraine. Ukraine has not applied to join NATO since 2009. 2009, they created a NATO-Ukraine charter, otherwise known as NUC, N-U-C, and then the following year, 2010, from the Kiev Post, Ukraine makes it official. Nation will abandon plans to join NATO. This piece coming from Reuters, okay? Another source for you. So this man's claim that NATO is somehow going to expand into Ukraine is pure delusion. It's fantasy. It's not real. This man is looking for a reason to annex more regions of Ukraine into Russia. So what is the next play? Because clearly NATO is not a good enough excuse. Everybody's calling him out on it. Chemical freaking weapons. This story from Euromandian Press. Chemical leak in Russian-occupied Donbas may be a red flag operation, Ukraine intelligence warns. Dateline, January 15th of this year, a chemical leak in Russia-occupied Donbas may become the pretext of a Russian invasion into Ukraine, because they can't keep beating, "Oh no, the NATO's coming" drum. They need to find something else. So they're going with this chemical leak that they've already started doing. In a statement published on January 15th from Ukraine's main intelligence director, the Ministry of Defense informed that Russian-occupied administration lost control over chemical substances that are being brought into occupied Donbas. This could be part of a red flag operation to intensify aggression against Ukraine, it warns. According to military intelligence of Ukraine, January 14th, containers that are leaking toxic ammonia were delivered to a fertilizer plant to a city in Donbas occupied by Russian troops. These can lead to an environmental catastrophe for Eastern Europe and could be used by Russia to accuse Ukraine of using chemical weapons as a pretext to intensify the armed aggression against Ukraine. And U.S. intelligence from another source, going back to the Associated Press, published by Market Watch here, U.S. intelligence assessments is that it is very credible that Russia is mapping out a false flag incident using chemical weapons. And as if on cue, 7 hours ago, at the time of this recording, the head of occupied authorities in parts of Donetsk region of Ukraine, that's the Ukraine area that's backed by Russian troops and Russian supplies, Russian money, Russian arms, quote, say, "We are ready for provocations from Kiev with chemical weapons, possibly in Kiev-controlled territories, to blame Russia. They're already doing it. They have ammonia. They're leaking ammonia so that they can use the results from this ammonia damage to say, look, it's a chemical weapon attack. And then Russia comes in. It's already happening. It's already happening. This man has lost all pretense of any justification of occupation, annexation, operations in Ukraine, in my opinion. I don't know what's leading him to the brinksmanship, so let's go to the New York Times and listen to somebody who does. His name is Anton Troianovsky. Credit to him. From December, a month ago, he writes from Moscow, as Kremlin masses troops in Ukraine, it is signaling one core conviction. Russia cares more about the fate of its southwestern neighbor than the West ever will. That is so true. The West is not trying to bring Ukraine into NATO. You know, it would be wrong to say we don't care about Ukraine, because of course we care about human life, but we certainly are trying to bring them into NATO. That ship sailed over a decade ago, people. In speeches and interviews and lengthy articles, President Vladimir Putin and his close associates have telegraphed a singular fixation this year on the former Soviet Republic. Kremlin thesis goes that Ukrainians are one people with Russians, living in a failed state controlled by Western forces determined to divide and conquer post-Soviet world. This man, Putin, is living in fantasy world where the Soviet Union didn't fall and collapse and disintegrate. He's trying to, bring some of that back, into today's society. And it's just not going to happen. But he's trying to do it by military force, because it won't happen organically. Because, back to the piece, written and published by the New York Times, Ukraine's ousted a Russian-friendly president in 2014 and are increasingly in favor of binding their country to Western institutions, would largely beg to differ with Mr. Putin's conviction and finds a receptive ear among Russians who see themselves as linked intimately with Ukraine by generations through linguistics, cultural, economic, political, and family ties across borders. Now, with a force of 175,000 Russian troops poised in position near Ukraine by early next year, because remember, this was written in December, it's now 2022, in what Russian officials fear would be a prelude to invasion, centuries of shared history loom large. So now, not only are they using chemical weapons as a pretense to, go in and save the Ukrainian people, they're also saying, hey, we are, culturally and economically linked. We have family ties in Ukraine, which is all true. That's all true, but it's not justification for military action and annexation. That is not the case. Ukraine is not Russia. As much as this delusional person wants it to be, it is not. And the movement of these ships potentially into the Crimean Peninsula to add additional capability for an amphibious invasion in the Sea of Azov into Ukraine is just another piece in the puzzle where we get a complete picture of what Putin's intentions are. I don't know how this ends, but it doesn't look really good. Thanks for watching.